What appears to be the first steps towards peace in Ukraine. Russia today announced plans to drastically reduce its military activity in northern Ukraine, including near the capital Kyiv. And a face-to-face meeting between both President Putin and Ukrainian President Zelensky is now being discussed, but Russia says that can happen only after a draft peace deal is in place. Well, tonight, Western governments are skeptical. They are warning that this could be a move to buy the Russian military more time before its next big attack.
A tense atmosphere in Turkey, with so much at stake. Ukrainian and Russian negotiators hold their first in-person talks in 2 weeks. Previous negotiations in Belarus and online have struggled to achieve lasting results. But the mood after this round appeared cautiously optimistic.
The most significant progress since the beginning of the talks was made today.
The Ukrainian delegation said it is prepared to accept neutral status and not to host foreign military within its borders. This prompted a promising response from the Russian side.
The Russian Defense Ministry has made the important decision to decrease military activity several-fold in the direction of Kyiv and Chernihiv to increase mutual trust and create the necessary conditions for further negotiations.
In exchange for neutrality and in place of NATO membership, Kyiv proposed a framework for other countries to act as security guarantors. These guarantees will be legally binding and allow those countries to intervene if Ukraine is attacked in the future. The delegation also stressed that any arrangement would need to be supported by the Ukrainian people in a referendum. But they warned that no treaty could be signed and no referendum held while Russian troops are still in Ukraine. Questions on more difficult topics still remain, notably on the status of eastern rebel territories of Donetsk and Luhansk. While President Zelensky has previously indicated a willingness to compromise on the matter, the Ukrainian delegation was clear.
The position of Ukraine does not change. We recognize the international borders of Ukraine as of 1991. There are no compromises or red lines here.
Delegates suggested these questions will be addressed at a higher level, opening the door for potential talks between Presidents Zelensky and Putin. Yet even as talks are underway, shelling continues. Footage from Tuesday morning captured the moment that a Russian rocket struck an administrative building in Mykolaiv, killing at least 7 people. A timely reminder of the high stakes behind these negotiations.
And for more now, we want to go to our correspondent, Dorian Jones. He is in Istanbul tonight. Dorian, it's good to see you. Help us understand what we're seeing here. We've got Ukraine saying that it would adopt a neutral status in return for security guarantees. Is this in line with what Russia is demanding?
Well, Russia hasn't given any formal response to what was discussed in these Tuesday meetings. I mean, to be honest, there's a lot of ambiguity over the nature of the guarantee status that the Ukrainians are demanding from these 8 countries, which include Poland, Turkey and Israel. And what would be the nature of how they would protect Ukraine if it was attacked again? And even the Ukrainian delegation were unclear too. One member of the delegation said it would be like NATO, where an attack on one is an attack on all, which would mean that all 8 countries would have to presumably come militarily to the support of Ukraine. But another delegate suggested possibly it would just be a no-fly zone would be established over Ukraine and arms would be supplied to the country. So it's these technicalities and fine details which probably would shape Moscow's response. But the key thing here at the moment is that they are talking about these key issues of resolving the conflict, and they do appear to be talking them in a serious way, which probably is the first time since this conflict started.
Yeah, and it prompted the Turkish foreign minister today to say that these are the most meaningful steps, progress steps that we have seen since the start of negotiations. Would you agree with that? And I mean, we're not coming very far to begin with, are we?
Well, exactly. I mean, to be honest, it doesn't say much at all because the previous meetings achieved very little indeed. So any progress is going to be significant. But having said that, there does appear to be a different mood following these talks. The music mood is much more positive. Both delegations are saying that the talks were positive and constructive. And I think that that's a reflection of what's happening on the ground in Ukraine, where the Ukrainian forces do appear to have fought the Russian forces to a standstill, at least for now. So there is a stalemate possibly. And that, I think, is creating a possible window of opportunity for diplomacy to resolve this conflict. Whether that status in the conflict in Ukraine remains will be possibly key to whether the present apparent progress continues.
And we know that Russia said today that it plans to radically cut back its military activity near the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. How is this being read, Dorian? I mean, is this a sign that Russia is really ready to step back to an extent in this war?
Well, I think Russia does suffer from a big credibility gap for what it says and what it does. Let's recall that Russia was promising it had no plans to invade Ukraine. Well, that proved not to be true. So I think Ukraine has a great deal of distrust over Russian offers and commitments. I think the reality is that they'll be looking very carefully at what that means on the ground, whether Russia is sincere in what it means. What does it mean by significant? Are these major rocket strikes and attacks going to come to an end? And I think that what happens there will be very key to what happens going forward, whether there will be an opportunity for further progress. If things improve on the ground in Ukraine, I think that that will be a very important boost to the efforts to bring an end to this conflict and ultimately the goal of bringing the Russian and Ukrainian presidents together.
And Dorian, you said the mood music right now, these talks, is positive. And I'm wondering, is this building a crescendo that will end in face-to-face talks between both presidents, Ukraine and Zelensky? I mean, is that where we're headed? How realistic is it that we're going to see that happen?
Well, let's be clear. I think all sides agree that the only way this conflict is going to end is when the two presidents sit down. Now, the Ukrainians have been offering talks even before Russia invaded, and Moscow is refusing, saying that they'll only sit down when there is something tangible to discuss, where there is a framework, where there is where there's a realistic chance that there will be success. Now, this is what these present talks are all about, creating a framework. And the Turkish Foreign Ministry is saying that they are now looking to the next step of bringing again the Russian and Ukrainian foreign ministers together. If that occurs and if there is more progress there, then possibly that can create a possible meeting between the two presidents and a chance to bring an end to this conflict. But we have a long way to go.
Our very own Dorian Jones in Istanbul with the latest tonight. Dorian, thank you. And our coverage of these peace talks continues. Here at the big table with me now is our reporter, Natalia Smoletseva. She has been monitoring today's talks. Natalia, let's talk about the offer that we're hearing or that we're getting from Russia. There's a lot of skepticism in the West about how serious Russia is now that we're 5 weeks into this war. I mean, what's your assessment? I mean, can we believe Russia?
Well, in Russia itself, these talks have been also met with what I'd say will be a cautious optimism. It was obviously widely reported on the Russian media, and what they say is that this is a meaningful progress. And this word meaningful, I guess it's the most positive description of what's happening in Istanbul. And Russian media said that Russia is actually going 2 steps forward towards the de-escalation. These 2 steps meaning the reduction of military activity there and the possible meeting between 2 presidents, Putin and Zelensky. And this, I think, can be one of the most significant outcomes if it will happen from these talks, because even several weeks ago, we couldn't imagine Putin sitting at the same table with Zelensky, because he actually called authorities in Kyiv a bunch of Nazis and drug addicts. And now, if he actually going to be sitting at the same table with Zelensky, this will mean that Russia actually recognizes the authority in Kyiv.
All right, and we want to hear from the Russian negotiator, right? Let's take a listen.
After today's meaningful discussion, we reached an agreement by which a meeting between the heads of state would be possible at the same time as the foreign ministers draw up a treaty. Especially because while drawing up and confirming details of the treaty, it might be necessary to agree some political nuances and details. If the treaty is prepared quickly and the desirable compromise is found, the possibility of peace will become much closer.
Yeah, this peace treaty, what are Russia's conditions for peace?
Well, today the talks, Russia hasn't voiced any conditions, actually. They've listened to what Ukraine had to say and said that they will take this considerations from Ukrainian side, bring it back home and discuss it with Kremlin, especially with Putin. So there was no new information on the Russian side. Russia's aim for this war or military operation, as it was called and is still called in Russia, is the denazification and demilitarization, whatever that means. It wasn't clear from the very beginning what it is, so this can mean literally anything. What is important for Russia is this neutral status of Ukraine. And it was also discussed today. There was a proposal from the Ukrainian side about the NATO, about the EU. So we'll see where that goes. And also what's very important is the status of Donbass and Crimea. Russia has never said that, or stressed actually that there was no intention in occupying Ukraine or overthrowing the regime there, even though in the very first days of the war it seems like that would be an end goal, actually getting Ukraine really fast and getting rid of the government there. Yeah. But now it seems like because of the military losses that Russia experienced there, it will actually lower their appetite and will be possibly happy with the outcome of getting the Russian-speaking Donbass region or getting control of this region at least.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people would say that that's a big stretch to believe that Russia would be happy to end the war with that condition. What about this promise or this announcement that Russia is going to scale back its military activities around Kyiv? Is it plausible? I mean, or is it just maybe a tactic to buy time?
Well, what we've heard now from the delegation, that the de-escalation doesn't actually mean a ceasefire. So on the ground, the shelling is continuing. What can it mean? It can actually be actually stating what's happening there, because Russia has been not advancing on this in the northern part of Ukraine and Kyiv and Chernihiv region for some time now. They have been effectively stuck, so it can also just state what's already there, but also it can mean change of tactics. Some analysts say that the possible next move can be that that actually the armies that are employed there will be sent to the Donbass region, and this new goal of actually circling Ukrainian army in Donbass region and effectively getting this region can actually be also sold at home as victory.
Yeah, we will see if this regrouping and refocusing, if it actually takes place. Natalia, thank you.
Thank you.
And from those peace talks to the situation on the ground in Ukraine, and that situation is a mixed picture. Tens of thousands of civilians remain trapped in dire humanitarian conditions in the besieged port city of Mariupol. And in the southern city of Mykolaiv, several people were reportedly killed when a Russian missile hit a regional government building. Dozens more were wounded. But Ukrainian forces, for their part, are recapturing territory from the Russian aggressors. All right, for more now, we want to go to our correspondent, Nick Connolly. He is in Kyiv. Nick, it's good to see you. You are in the Ukrainian capital. I mean, what do people think of what we're hearing from Russia's deputy defense minister, that it plans to reduce its military activity near the capital?
Well, people here in Kyiv, Brent, are definitely taking those announcements with a significant pinch of salt. Just this evening, we've been hearing the usual bangs in the distance. Some of that will be Ukrainian anti-aircraft systems knocking things out of the sky, but there is also artillery fire nightly, daily in the suburbs of Kyiv. We've also had reports of Russian forces some way out of Kyiv trying to dig in, building trenches and other fortifications, seemingly prepared to be here in the long run. But yes, as you mentioned previously, they're not doing very well. They're not taking Kyiv. And for now, I think people feel like the city has stood up to that Russian force on its doorstep. Let's have a listen to what people here in Kyiv on the street had to say about those announcements from Istanbul today.
That sounds good, but actually, I don't believe it.
The question is whether they are going to do this.
These are not the first talks, and every time we hear the same thing, that they want to scale down the fighting, but in fact, they step it up.
I don't think we can trust Russia. All their words are worth nothing. We believed that they would not wage a full-scale invasion. Now I don't trust their words.
And Nick, at the same time, there seems to have been wins by the Ukrainian army over the past few days. I mean, can you tell us more about that?
Well, I think there's no kind of contrast between those things. I think the Russians are putting a brave face on their defeats and lack of success around Kiev. And yes, we've had news in recent days of Irpin, one of the big suburbs of Kiev, about 25 kilometers as the crow flies from where I am here, that saw some pretty atrocious civilian losses. Lots of people will have seen those pictures of the destroyed bridge and people trying to cross with their children, their pets. Lots of civilians died trying to get out of that town. That now seems to be fully back in control of the Ukrainian army and some of the nearby towns, which saw some of the worst fighting in the early days of this war, seemingly, according to Ukrainian sources, at least now surrounded by Ukrainian forces. In the east of the country, closer with the land border with Russia, there are some towns retaken by Ukraine. Just as I'm speaking to you now, I can hear some pretty loud bangs in the distance. That's probably artillery fire. So this is all still very real, but a sense that the Ukrainian tactics have paid off, not engaging in direct battle with the Russians in the countryside, in the open areas, not giving the Russians the kind of battle that they could do well in. Instead, the kind of guerrilla tactics and really working hard to deprive those Russian forces of the logistics and the fuel and the food that they need to keep on fighting.
And Nick, do we have a sense of the progress, or if there has been any progress in evacuating people, civilians, out of cities that are taking a really, really heavy hit from the Russian military? And I'm thinking of Mariupol. Do we know tonight?
Mariupol particularly has been uniquely unlucky, as it were. It is a city that's definitely seen the worst in the way of civilian casualties during this war. We understand about 100,000 people are still left, 100,000 civilians. So that would mean about 3/4 of the population had been able to leave in recent days and weeks. But these attempts are never particularly well organised, and there's lots of chaos and people getting hurt trying to get out, even if some kind of temporary ceasefire has been organised. It's very difficult to get a kind of accurate picture of the situation on the ground, but they just don't have electricity for the most part. They don't have mobile phone connection, so lots of the time you're talking to people who've got out previously and have tell you about what the situation was like 3-4 days before. Often they're not able to tell you about what their family, their friends who are still there are going through. But the stories are all pretty much the same. Stories of people stuck in cellars for days at a time, of bodies going on unburied, just lying on the streets, and of people getting so hungry that they're having to break into shops to get some food just to survive.
Yeah, it's unimaginable, and yet it is the reality there on the ground. DW's Nick Connolly with the latest tonight from Kyiv. Nick, thank you.
And we can talk now to Stefan Meister. He is with the German Council on Foreign Relations and an expert in Russian security and foreign policy. Mr. Meister, welcome to DW. Now, Russia says it's scaling back operations in order to create an atmosphere of trust. Can we really be sure that these peace talks are happening in good faith?
I think it is, first of all, a strategic move from the Russian side to create options. The whole war is not going how Putin and the Russian leadership has planned this war, and it needs a kind of an option to declare victory, and it could be about eastern Ukraine. But I think there is no trust. Yeah, I think there's no trust at all. Russian leadership was attacking, or Russia was attacking Ukraine. It was lying several times on what are the goals. It was changing also rhetorically its goals. So I think we have to wait until we can really assess what this move now really means.
Could we see it as some kind of positive step, or should we remain completely suspicious of what the Russians are saying?
No, I think it's the most positive step we have seen in all this war. And I think we clearly understand that Russia has high loss also of material and of people, and it cannot win this war. Yeah, and it might stuck for long in Ukraine. So I think that there might be a step out of Ukraine in terms of just keeping a part of it and then maybe move later to Kiev again. But I think Kiev is for the time being not the main target of the Russian attack, and that's already positive.
We're hearing talk of the idea of a neutral Ukraine. Do you see Putin accepting a neutral Ukraine? And would a neutral Ukraine, in fact, ever be enough for Putin and his ambitions?
The question is what neutral Ukraine means. Yeah, so I think we don't talk about Austria, in terms of status, but it is about lack of sovereignty of Ukraine, not joining any military alliance, and not really having security guarantees, but always being threatened also by Russia, and need also to take into consideration Russian interests. Yeah, so I think that's the neutrality Russia is thinking about. And if this kind of neutrality is acceptable for Ukraine, then I think there might be an agreement. Yeah, but I think for me this is an euphemism what Russian leadership is using with this neutrality term. So it's really about the conditions.
Let's talk about the talks that have been taking place in Istanbul today. Can you describe Turkey's role in all of this?
Yeah, I think the advantage of Erdogan is that his country is NATO member, and at the same time he has a good relationship with Mr. Putin. He loves these kind of diplomatic formats, and it's really upgrading him also. Yeah, his role in European security. At the same time, Turkey has really direct interests. It has interest on stability and security in the Black Sea region. It has economic interest. Russians are a major part of tourists also traveling to Turkey. So I think there are several issues. Turkey has really direct interests, and I think in this sense it makes sense, that Erdogan is providing this platform.
Stefan Meister with the German Council on Foreign Relations. Thanks so much.
Yeah, welcome.
Amnesty International is accusing Russia of committing war crimes in Ukraine. The human rights group says that the Russian army is deliberately targeting civilians and striking hospitals, schools, and apartment buildings. The invasion has uprooted more than 6 million people within Ukraine. It has sent almost 4 million refugees into neighboring countries. Earlier today, DW News spoke to the Secretary General of Amnesty International and asked about those claims of human rights violations.
I think the best way of describing the situation is to say that the country is on fire. We have been documenting an escalation of human rights and humanitarian law violations, including the indiscriminate or deliberate targeting of civilians infrastructures such as hospitals and schools. We know that in cities under siege, humanitarian corridors are not functioning, trapping people in those cities. We have also documented the use of weapons which have a disproportionate impact, weapons many of which have actually been the object of contravention under international law. So the situation right now is one of major, severe suffering imposed on the people of Ukraine.
Well, here in Germany, authorities are discussing banning the use of symbols such as the Z or Z that you see here to express support for Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Now, this letter has become the most prominent symbol of Russia's war efforts and is a common sight on Russian military vehicles and pro-Russian social media accounts. Germany's intelligence agencies say that they have evidence that the letter Z has already been used in Germany at pro-war rallies, but also as graffiti and on vehicles.
The letter Z, as such, is of course not forbidden, but in certain cases its use can mean an approval of the Russian war of aggression and can therefore be prohibited according to Article 140 of Germany's Penal Code. The Russian war of aggression on Ukraine is a crime. Those who publicly approve of it can make themselves liable to prosecution.
Well, shortly after Russia invaded Ukraine, Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz announced a historic increase in military spending. It included a one-time sum of 100 billion euros to swiftly upgrade the armed forces and a pledge to spend at least 2% of Germany's GDP on defense every year. So what exactly is Germany planning to buy with all of this money? Here's a closer look.
These US-built aircraft are top of the Bundeswehr shopping list. The F-35 can carry all types of weapons. Its design and coating make it difficult for radar to detect. With Germany's current fleet of fighter jets aging fast, an upgrade is long overdue.
The F-35 is the most modern combat aircraft in the world, and many of our partners, especially here in Europe, have also chosen it. Together with our partners in the alliance, we'll strengthen our ability to secure NATO airspace, credibly deter, and also, if need be, defend ourselves.
The deal marks a shift in policy. Instead of pursuing its own development projects, the Bundeswehr is buying what's on the market. Even though critics say it increases Germany's dependency on the US, the war in Ukraine has made military modernization even more urgent. When it comes to air defense, the German armed forces are now also considering purchasing an Israeli anti-missile shield. The system is called Arrow 3 and complements the so-called Iron Dome to protect Israel against rockets. It can shoot down long-range ballistic missiles and would be powerful enough to protect countries in Eastern Europe as well. That's something Germany so far has not been able to do, but might need to in the future.
We must all prepare ourselves for the fact that we have a neighbour who's currently prepared to use force to assert his interests. And that's why we have to make ourselves strong together, so that that doesn't happen.
Also needed, new heavy-lift transport helicopters to replace the old Sikorsky CH-53s, a system developed in the 1960s. The list of what the Bundeswehr needs to bring it into the 21st century is a long one. From Navy ships and tanks to radio equipment and ammunition. Easing the backlog caused by decades of chronic underfunding will likely take years.
A delegation of German lawmakers is currently in Israel to discuss the potential purchase of Israeli defense systems. DW's correspondent in Jerusalem spoke to Falco Drossman. Now, he's a member of the governing Social Democrats, and he's a member of the Defense Committee in the German parliament. Here is what he had to say about this visit.
After the fall of the Berlin Wall, we believed in peace and we believed in cultural exchange and economical exchange. And Putin destroyed that. So that's why we decided to spend 100 billion euros extra on military capabilities to strengthen Germany and to strengthen NATO. We saw all the three systems. We saw the Iron Dome, we saw David Sling, and now we saw the Arrow 3, which is like a long-range capability. And of course, this could be a system because it already exists. Of course, in Germany and in Europe, we want to develop our own systems, but I mean, Israel is a strong partner, especially in security industry, in weapon industry, and now we have to decide whether this is a system we can use and we can use quickly.